holds a PhD. Exactly. Thomas holds a PhD in psychology by the University of Klagenfurt here in Austria, and he's currently associated professor at the Department of Environmental System Sciences in the University of Graz. In his research, Thomas focuses on the interdisciplinary field of sustainability and innovation research from the perspective of psychology and behavioral sciences, with a specific focus on decision-making related to sustainability transitions and climate action. Other areas of work include the behavioral economics and experimental economics, business psychology and environmental psychology, sustainability and innovation management, sustainable development and system sciences, and complex adaptive systems. In 2023, he was appointed as a member of the Scientific Climate Advisory Board of the City of Graz. He is also a columnist for Focus Online and Tag 1 magazine für Change. Sorry, my German is not that good. And he is the author and co-author of more than 30 publications in international journals and books, as well as a contribution in print media, radio, TV media, such as ORF, ARD, and more Dutch journals. So now, Thomas, the floor is yours. And yeah, let's enjoy this presentation.
Thank you, Paula. I wonder where you find all this information. I think you know more about me than I know myself, or probably I already have forgotten some of these things. So thanks a lot for this very comprehensive introduction. Yeah, I'm a sustainability researcher who tries to bring in the human aspects into this field a little bit. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I have also extensively worked on communicating science, especially around climate change, but also more broadly about sustainability. And I'm not used anymore to give academic conferences. I don't remember if I even joined an academic conference in the last 2 years, but I have done over 150 science to public events. So this will also reflect a little bit in my slides, as you will see. This will not be a typically academic presentation, but it will have a lot of pictures, illustrations, and not so many statistics. You will not see any regressions or stuff like that. I will share my screen. So we tested it before, so I'm confident it works out. And here we go. Yes, I get the sign from Max. Yeah, I mean, the title is very broad: human behavior, sustainability, and climate change. I will just share a few thoughts about the situation we are in as a society, about the challenges I see from a behavioral perspective to achieve sustainability transitions and to, engage in more ambitious climate action. And I would like to start with the cover page I discovered on an Austrian newspaper around 1.5 years ago. And I will translate it. It's one of the few German texts you will see today. It's, for me, a very nice summary of what is going on at the moment. On this cover page, we see on the right side a headline. It's a warning that the world heads for this +3 degrees global warming. And on the left side, we see the celebrations for the Argentinian president that was elected back then. Like you might have heard of anarcho-capitalist Javier Milei, who also happens to deny human-made climate change. And for me, this is a very nice summary because we see on one side that the warnings coming from science are getting more intense, more loud, more heavy. And on the other side, we see how many parts of the population basically ignore that or run away from this inconvenient situation and follow those leaders who don't really have answers to these challenges or even deny the challenge itself. However, if we then zoom a little bit in and we ask people, how worried are you about something like climate change? And you could also ask, of course, about the biodiversity loss and other things, but climate change is normally most prominent in the public perception. How worried are you about climate change? Then we see very different results. It really depends on whom you ask. And what I show here is a result from an Austrian survey that we took also like 1.5 years ago already. I don't have more recent data for Austria. I will say a few things about international data. What we see here is that like 1.5 years ago, the level of worry and concern was rather on the high side. Like you see here, this 9% extremely worried, 23% on level 6 out of 7, and then another 23%, 5 out of 7 on this scale. And what we see over time is that compared to like 7 to 10 years ago, this middle group that here stands with 18% has become smaller, and that on average, worry about climate change has increased. What we see, especially in the last 1 to 2 years, maybe already throughout the post-pandemic period, is that also the groups that say, I'm not worried at all, this is all a scam, are also getting bigger again. And here we have a lot of country differences. In Germany, for example, the groups who are not worried at all, the groups who are worried are approximately of the same size, when in Austria it's still more shaped towards the higher worry. But it also depends on how people are asked in the surveys, right? If you specifically ask for, are you worried about climate change? Then people tend to say yes, a little bit, or yes, somewhat. But if you ask them, what is your main worry? Then climate change normally does not come in first. What worries people more is their personal lives, like health, relationships, or jobs. If I'm not sure if I will have my job tomorrow, if I'm afraid to break up with my partner, then climate change is just not so salient in my daily life. So this is always something that we need to consider. If you don't need to worry about other things, then maybe you also can worry about the climate change. It's a very general statement. I'm simplifying here, of course. If you look back on the public discourse on the topic, I would like to look back to 2006, and maybe some of you remember, but probably most of you were too young. Even I was quite young back then. Al Gore's film came out in 2006, An Inconvenient Truth, and it really sparked a discussion worldwide about climate change. And what happened in the years that followed was, sometimes highlights, sometimes lowlights. 2015, the Paris Agreement, as you know, 2018 and 19, Fridays for Future became rather big, I would say, also was a global movement, at least in the global north. And in 23, we had in some countries of Europe the last generation movement that was really blocking roads and annoying people a lot, but also really pointing to the challenge that is ahead. So we could say that climate change was quite prominent in the public discourse in the last years, at least in the countries that I followed, right? I might not hold in every country. So we had warnings by scientists, we had activists, we had international agreements, we had even movies. What happened last year was very interesting for me in a few respects. We had in Europe, but also elsewhere, a lot of extreme events, floodings that were not seen before. And we know that something like extreme flooding, extreme rainfall, it's an event that gets more likely, more extreme in a hotter climate. And this is a picture that was going through media last year. It shows the German minister president, Markus Söder. He is the minister president of, not of Germany, but of a federal state of Bavaria, in the very south, the region that was very heavily hit. And he visited the sites where the flooding occurred. And he then, in an interview on camera, said basically the following: nobody could have possibly seen that coming. And this is striking for me after we have this big media attention on the topic already for a while. It is part of a bigger problem. I will come back to that, because this is not even the most extreme form such statements can take. We also had a very severe flooding event in Austria a few months later in September 24. And for this flooding event, we had very precise predictions. Like the weather stations already a few days before said, look, intense rain is coming, we better prepare. But then preparation was maybe still not sufficient everywhere. And when the minister president of an Austrian federal state was then interviewed, she basically said the following: nobody could have known that the predictions would be correct. So you see, this is a very interesting way to deal with such events. And it looks like there's still a lot to do in terms of communication at first. But I believe that such statements relate to, to the way how humans perceive and make perceive threats and also make decisions around this. And very often, by the way, I'll show this. You will see I work with illustrations, right? And I show very often characters to basically make a cartoon version of what is happening in reality. Nobody could have known, this one here says. Such statements, of course, to a certain degree self-protection, but they also reflect our decision-making around such problems. And very often, also in the public discourse, we hear that climate policy or other sustainability policies need to be approached with common sense. Yeah, we need common sense. In German, it's the Hausverstand or the gesunde Menschenverstand. So this translates literally into the healthy mind of the human. And it basically stands for our intuitive decision making, right? We do something based on our common sense. And doing things based on common sense is, in a lot of situations, a good idea. For example, I mean, just before I entered the meeting, I received an email from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they offer me €1 million. Right? And I was happy to get such an email. But then, of course, common sense tells me that I should not fall for such a trick. Not again, at least. But it basically means that when we apply common sense, we can, of course, apply it to these very simple daily situations where we already have experience. But common sense or our intuition, our gut feelings are not very well suited to deal with complex challenges or with challenges that we have not seen before. And climate change clearly is such a challenge. We don't really have experience on how to deal with it. Our gut feelings are not programmed for that. Not genetically, also not from an experience-based perspective. So common sense does not work here, but it's still something that feels very familiar with us. We like to trust our common sense. And here common sense is just not enough. In general, when it comes to topics around environment, climate, sustainability, very often the reaction of people or the approach of people is something like this, like illustrated here. So what does this mean now for me? What should I do? Can I do something? There is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of misconceptions. And also have an illustration here, but we'll have sources in a second. It's a cartoon from the book I wrote a few years ago, 2 years ago, I think. I planted 4 trees, so I'm climate neutral. The other capybara says, you know nothing. And this is just an illustration of what we see, namely that climate literacy in general is very limited in the general population. Was like this 15 years ago. It still is like this nowadays. We have here an Austrian study. We have international studies that basically show that people have just very rudimentary understanding of the challenges there. There are massive knowledge gaps regarding the role of water vapor, which is a technical issue. There is confusion on the role of plastics and how effective avoiding plastic is when it comes to climate action. There's a lot of misunderstandings regarding a natural greenhouse effect. Also, a lot of people connect in their own mental models the ozone hole topic with the climate change topic. So the idea is that the ozone hole basically causes climate change. This is what we see in systematic surveys. A lot of confusion. At the same time, we also see overconfidence. So if we ask people, yeah, how sure are you that what you're saying here in this survey, how sure are you that what you say is correct? We see the people on average are always 80% sure that they are correct. So no matter how wrong the answers are, by the way. So the gap between what people think to know and what they actually know is rather big and not so easy to close. So this is one way of dealing with climate change. The other one is this one here. Yeah, don't want to hear, don't want to see, or this very aggressive, yeah, denial or just defense mechanism when climate or sustainability issues come up. And from a psychological perspective, this is very understandable. If we take all the sustainability policies that are on the table, if we take them serious, they mean an attack on current lifestyles, maybe on identities, on ideologies. And if people perceive an attack on themselves, it's very natural that they would react with a defense posture or maybe even with a counterattack. And this is a lot what we see. Of course, we also have organized climate change denial. We have a lot of science denial. We also see how trust in institutions over the last 20 years is going down massively. So institutions like politics or science are not trusted as much anymore as it used to be 20, 30, or 50 years ago. And this, of course, facilitates science denial, right? Especially when it comes to climate change. It's a challenge that scientists have identified, but we don't trust scientists. And it's a challenge that needs political action, but we also don't trust politics. So this makes it very difficult. And then, even if we deal with people who are in principle aware of the challenges, we see often this thing here. Excuses why it doesn't work. We cannot do it in our country because. We cannot, or we don't need to do it in our company because. And I don't need to do it in my life because. So this is the structure of arguments that we see a lot. It's also something very human, and very often it relates to how we view ourselves. If we look into survey data, we very often meet this character. And you see this person there also has some similarity with me. Shows seemingly a little bit of concern for what happens around. But you also see there seems to be some eco-attitude here illustrated in the T-shirt. And many people view themselves as eco-friendly, maybe even climate-friendly. And this relates to a positive self-image. That is a very healthy thing to have. Also, a lot of people believe that they are excellent car drivers, way above average. We see it actually in every field, right? The self-image is normally very positive, unless you go into a depression, then this might notice that we view ourselves as great, or at least as likable. And when it comes to environmental topics, we also have this a lot. What we see in the mirror is this guy here, EcoHans, or maybe EcoHana, a superhero that is already doing enough and would state, I'm eco-friendly already. What do you want? I do my share, I do enough. And the logic here can be easily justified. And people are very good in justifying such logics because they find evidence for that statement. And the evidence we find is maybe something like this. I turn off the lights regularly. I do recycling now. Just had a phone call with a friend in Australia, or video call. He told me that he's doing recycling now, after I told him that I'm not flying anymore. So it's an interesting discussion. We heat less. And these things are all good things to do. But if we then look into the impact such actions have just on the individual environmental balance, we will normally find that it is rather low. What I have here in this chart is actually climate impact of these actions. To the right, to the x-axis, you see the impact such actions have relatively on the individual level. On the y-axis, you would see the difficulty, and no single-use plastic can be very difficult. While turning off the lights, I would say, is an action that can easily be done. But we also see here there's much more on this set of options that we could do for climate action on the individual level. And we see that especially mobility choices, maybe also nutritional choices, would have more impact. So the potential CO2 emissions are much higher. And then we also have things like here in this question mark that are very difficult to quantify, that are maybe not so much related to an ecological footprint, but to this alternative, newer concept of the ecological handprint. So where it is about working on structures, contributing to structures that make climate-friendly or sustainable choices more easy to be made. So this is here not quantified. And if we now look back at public campaigns in the last 20, 25 years, we see that the focus very often was here on the left side. Yeah, we have to ban plastic. We should heat less, or we should minimize our water use. So all reasonable things, right? But the hope was also, and I remember when I started, when I was a young researcher, that there was this idea that there would be spillover effects. That basically we start with these small things with little impact, but they are quite easy. And then at some point, people will like switch to become more vegan, live car-free and so on. Maybe not fly anymore. This was maybe the implicit hope. We start small and then we make bigger steps. And a lot of research was done on this. John Dogerson, the Danish environmental psychologist, published several papers on this topic. And what he found is that this is not really happening. It is happening only in a few people, namely people who have very strong environmental attitudes. Then you might see such a spillover from one domain to another one. But it does not happen in most of the people. Most of the people would engage rather, it's of course a distraction as well. I'll come back to that later. Most people would rather engage in something like this, moral licensing. And this is the justification or the balancing of different actions. So I can justify that I fly because I'm good elsewhere. I use less plastic, I save energy, so it's okay to fly. This is a logic that we see a lot. Of course, reality looks different, especially when it comes to flying. If we then really calculate the individual share of the emissions, flying is huge, as you probably know. So you cannot balance this with saving energy. I once calculated for the Austrian electricity mix how long you could switch on all the lights in your average home to have the same emission balance or the same climate impact like with one transatlantic flight. And the result was 300 years. So 300 years of lights on in your house equals the impact of one flight. In Germany, it's less. It's, I think, 80 or 90 years, depending on the share of fossil fuels in the energy mix. But these things just don't compare. But naturally, we are quite good in making such balancing attempts. And also marketing is basically teaching us to do. In this picture, this is a doll that I met last Easter. My niece got this doll as a gift. It's a plastic doll, but the plastic doll is, of course, wrapped in a carton packaging, a paper packaging. But it was very interesting to see this moral licensing aspect in this doll. I think Larissa was her name. And what you see here is little Larissa with a single-use cup, with a small trolley, with a pillow for the neck, with a passport. So basically everything that you need for a lifestyle that features a lot of flying. And then there is a story that is being sold with this doll. And the story has two aspects, one that I would support, one that I would not support. The first aspect is the one of female empowerment. And it really tells the girls who buy this doll that you are an extraordinary generation of girls, super fast runners, treasure hunters, magicians, dreamers. and we raise funds to protect the rainforest. This is what it all says. But basically, it then comes also with this moral licensing aspect. Yeah, we fly around the world, we explore everything, and then we raise some funds for the rainforest. And of course, we recycle and reuse, and therefore the plastic doll is packaged in materials from recycled and recyclable materials. So this is exactly the same mechanism, I would say. But also, we don't really have a good idea what climate impacts are and how this looks like if we would translate into CO2 equivalents. So this is something we also cannot really understand with common sense. And I have a list here when you would emit 1 ton of CO2 with lifestyle choices. It's just one flight from Vienna to Dublin. It's CO2 equivalents, by the way. It's 4,000 kilometers per car. And then there are a few other things as well. I will go a little bit through. I will share the slides if you're interested. Anyway, the idea of such a comparison is not mine. It is from Lucia Reich. I've seen it in a webinar of hers at some point. The funny thing is that very often we get this argument, yeah, then we need to build more trees. We build more trees, or plant more trees, they compensate, they basically absorb. But 1 ton of CO2 also corresponds to approximately 8 years of growth of a beach. A beach needs to grow for quite some time to compensate for this one flight. Yeah, then we have taxes and so on. Another excuse that we often hear is this one here. Yeah, we need to do this technologically. Technologies will solve our problem. And that's, from a psychological perspective, again, very convenient, right? If technologies solve all these challenges for us, we can continue as before. And it's, of course, true that sustainability transitions are not possible without technological innovation. We need renewable energies, we need a couple of other things. But it is, of course, also not true that this is the only solution or the entire solution. This techno salvation, however, is very popular in the political discourse, also in the public discourse. And something that I observed, which I found particularly interesting, was an advertising in, again, an Austrian newspaper. The article where this was placed was about climate damage. But then the Austrian oil company OMV put a very big poster there, as you can see. And what they say here is ready for takeoff into a climate-friendly future. Then you see kids playing with toy airplanes. And they also say then in the smaller font that they take the next step. And in a very small print, they explain how. And then they talk about sustainable aviation fuels and how this will solve the problem. Sustainable aviation fuels is an interesting topic, mainly because sustainable aviation fuels don't exist. We have biofuels, as you know, that require land and pesticides and water. We have competition to food production in all likelihood. Then there are these synthetic fuels or e-fuels that are very inefficient, that need a lot of energy in the first place to be produced. So this is also actually quite a challenge, but probably the main solution for air travel anyway, if we want to do it climate neutral or kind of climate neutral. But OMV here, the Austrian oil company, promotes something else. They promote to use residual oil from frying. So like you must know, in Austria, we love to fry schnitzels. And we fry everything in oil, and then the oil, of course, is left. And OMV claims that this oil is being used for sustainable aviation fuels. And the research question for me then was, okay, that's interesting. So how many schnitzels do we need to fry to enable one flight from, let's say, Vienna to New York and back? And you can start guessing now. Good news is it's technically possible. You can indeed operate an airplane on frying oil. At least you can convert the frying oil into a fuel. So this is possible. The second good news is it's theoretically also possible that you eat enough schnitzels. So if you take this one flight, Vienna to New York, every passenger on the plane would need to eat 3,100 schnitzels. And then we would have enough oil, roughly. I can also explain the method, how we calculate it. It's, of course, just an approximate result. But like 3,100 schnitzels per person, schnitzels for 8 years every day, then we have enough oil to operate such a flight. If you would stack the schnitzels onto each other, yeah, this schnitzel mountain or Mount Schnitzel becomes rather big. It says here 1 million schnitzel approximately. Assuming an average thickness of 8 millimeters, you would have a mountain that is as tall as or as big as Mount Everest. So this is behind the promise. Yeah, technologies are great. Technologies can address of our challenges, but there are limitations, especially when it comes to the scalability. And in a broader picture, I would see it like this. There are climate action zones. And again, you see I'm very two-dimensional. We have here an x-axis where it is about the degree of behavioral intrusiveness. So how much do we need to change lifestyles? And then we have a degree of techno-fixability on the y-axis. And of course, there are things that we can solve technologically. Yeah, so call this technology heaven. We can decarbonize industrial processes. If steel production is happening with hydrogen instead of natural gas, the end users don't notice that. If public transport is decarbonized, like if the train is not a diesel train anymore, but an electrified train, yeah. Me as a passenger, I don't care. I just want to get on the train. Low carbon district heating, huge technological challenge, but it's a purely technological challenge. The narrative is that every challenge fits into this zone. And this is obviously not true. There is also this mixed territory where we have solutions, but these solutions require societal acceptance. Best example here are wind farms. We know that wind energy is low carbon, is relatively sustainability friendly, but of course has ecological impacts and other impacts. But the main barrier seems to be the social acceptance, like people opposing wind farms in the vicinity of neighborhoods or on mountains, like in Austria. And then we also have what I call a zone of political taboo. And this is the zone where behavioral change is essential, not necessarily on the individual level, but on the collective level. And this includes the reduction of air travel. We don't have enough sustainable aviation fuels in the next decades to still increase flying activity. It doesn't work out. Housing practices are a topic. Decarbonization of heating, maybe. It's a technological solution, but still it has a very strong behavioral component as well. We need to rethink mobility. We need to rethink diets. There are no technological solutions for that. I mean, technology aids, but it basically comes down to a lifestyle change. And in the political arena, this is not really discussed. Of course, there are excuses in all of these zones. Yeah, we're doing great already. Wind farms and everything else sounds complicated, and behavioral change. Is this really necessary? The others should go first. This is what we see a lot. So, wait, this is a double slide. Of course, on this behavioral side, there's very often this distraction by the focus on low impact measure. The challenge now is to somehow find pathways to such behavioral change. And on this path, we have a lot of challenges. It's defined pool of worry of people. People just don't worry about everything, right? They might worry about sustainability and climate change, but only if nothing else is really important at the moment. We have this phenomenon of psychological distance that relates to a lot of sustainability problems. The feeling that this is far away on many levels, on the spatial level, like, okay, climate change disasters, they happen somewhere else, is the feeling for many people, or they happen in the future. So we have a temporal distance. And then these disasters anyway affect people that I don't know, or are caused by people that I don't know. So we also have this social distance. Summarized into psychological distance. We have this lack of direct feedback of our action, the lack of self-efficacy. That means if I change something, if I now go by bike, and stop flying and only eat plants, I don't see an effect, right? I don't feel the climate or sustainability effect. We just have troubles to getting this feedback. We actually don't get it directly. We only get it if we connect it maybe with other benefits, with co-benefits like health. Can eat more plants, it's also more healthy. This is something you feel at some point. Very often we have helplessness. We also have what we call environmental hyperopia. Again, problems are somewhere else. We have dragons of inaction that Robert Gifford studied a lot. We, of course, have the political polarization, the increased mistrust in institutions, the omnipresent discourses of delay, and then the conflict with existing social practices, cultural values, lifestyles. So these are a lot of challenges. And this is reflected also in posters again, like this one here. This is from a supermarket I visited. They basically say, yeah, we do something for climate action, but you almost don't see it displayed because it's next to the advertising for meat and coal. So these are the challenges. And from a behavioral perspective, the solution per se is rather simple and is kind of reflected in these scissors here. And scissors, they only work if you have two blades, right? If you just take one blade, you cannot really cut anything. If you take both blades and they are not connected, you can also try to cut, but it will not really work out. So this needs to be connected. And here, the two blades of the scissors stand for, on the one hand, mindsets and attitudes. So this is where the psychology comes in a lot. But then also the context and the structure in which we operate. And this is very often ignored in psychology. It's not ignored in sustainability transitions literature. I'm aware of that. But I think we need to think about both of these aspects. And we also need to see the interconnectedness. And one example would be, bike lanes or like bike paths. If there are bike paths in a city, then people are more likely to bike. But these bike paths just don't appear magically. They only appear if already people bring the mindset and attitude and bike and then demand bike paths. So this is always connected. It's the same with like plant-based restaurants. Here in the vicinity of my office, there are a lot of restaurants with plant-based options, some poorly plant-based even. This would not be there if not 20 years ago people would have started eating plant-based and also demanding respective supply in the restaurants. So this is interconnected. And I think this is for me the model with which I would like to work. It's a very simple model, but it reminds us that human behavior cannot be understood if we just look at mindsets and attitudes. A lot of behavior is explained, or a lot of variance in behavior is explained by structure, context, and here we also include like the political context, maybe the overarching discourse, including what is happening on platforms like Twitter. So this is the two elements that we need to have in mind here. And as time is progressing, and I would like to have a discussion, this will be my last content slide. I will skip the research task. Maybe we'll just show one more picture that also maybe reflects a little bit what has been ignored for very long, namely social identities and living realities. There are groups in the population who have a legitimate interest to oppose any sustainability or climate policy because they might lose from it. The example here is truck drivers. You might also think of coal miners. So if we really take it serious, get serious with phasing out fossil fuels, then this will change living realities. It will change jobs. It maybe comes with economic loss for large groups in the population. And we need to find ways to consider that, right? So, of course, if I'm a truck driver, I don't want to hear about sustainability and climate. It's the legitimate thing to do. And of course, I, as a researcher, or maybe also somebody as a politician, cannot tell these people what to do, per se. We can try, but we probably won't succeed. So we really need to think of ways how to, find solutions here in like a co-creation way, right? I cannot ask the truck drivers, or I cannot tell the truck drivers what to do, but I could ask them what they can envision, what would be acceptable futures. So this is the line of thinking that I'm following, and I have presented a lot of challenges here, a lot of barriers. I still would like to end with a more positive note. So if we want to make contributions to sustainability transitions, then I think we will find our ways. And if we don't want to do that, we will always find excuses why it doesn't work out. So this was my maybe not so structured, but hopefully still interesting presentation. I hope there were a few things that you can take away. If you want to use the illustrations that I showed, they are free to use. I have a website, it's in German, but the illustrations are partly in English. It's given here, klimapsychologie.com. You might also connect me on LinkedIn. I post updates there in a not very regular way, but still a few times, maybe per month, or at least once in 2 months. There is something new there. And for those who like to read, there's a German book on the topic, and it has been translated into Korean. Unfortunately, no other languages yet. Thanks a lot for listening, and I give back the word to Max and Paula for moderation of questions.